Good morning, everyone. First of all, let me just say that I'm just so pleased to be here joining all of you today. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank AMTA for all the work that they've been doing in conjunction with the government of Alberta and just for supporting the industry so tremendously. I thought I'd start off by just telling you a little bit about myself. My name is Rajan Sawhney, and my name actually means king, Rajan. A lot of people have troubles pronouncing this name, so I always like to tell this story because it helps keep that the meaning in mind when you're thinking of me. And I always laugh when I talk to my mom about it. It took her about a month to name me, and she said she had lots of aspirations for me. I am from Calgary. I was born and raised in this beautiful city, and I'm a mother of 4. My eldest daughter is a reservoir engineer. I have a 16-year-old, and today is the birthday of my 12-year-old twins. So it's a great day in so many ways. I have also worked in the oil and gas industry for a number of years prior to getting into politics. And even though transportation is slightly different from what I've done in the past, there's a lot of transferability, and the skills that I undertook in the oil and gas industry, like looking at well sites and doing all kinds of analysis, are very much transferable to transportation. There are 3 key things that I would like to talk about today, actually. They are, first of all, when we're talking about leadership in a post-pandemic era, I was thinking about, well, what can I say? So I narrowed it down to 3 things. So the number 1 item that I'd like to talk about today is the impact on women as a result of the pandemic. Now, Angela had mentioned in her remarks that women have experienced a disproportionate impact. And prior to coming into transportation, I was a Minister of Community and Social Services. So I've done a lot of work on this particular topic. Number 2, I'd like to talk about supply chain disruption and the impact on the labor market. And finally, I would like to conclude by talking about leadership in the sector. And again, that is something that I do have a lot to say about. Now, I am the first female Minister of Transportation in Alberta, and I'm tremendously proud of that. And I have a lot of things that I'll be working on in the upcoming future. But as I mentioned, I had worked in community and social services prior to this particular portfolio. And one of the items that I had looked at that time was to do a deep dive into the impacts of the pandemic on women. I spent most of last year talking to women across the province to understand the nature of the difficulties they were facing. I also read everything that I could get my hands on from the Feminist Economic Recovery Report that was co-authored with the federal government and the YW to really understand what was happening. And as you're all aware, the unemployment rates for women have been much higher. They've been hit much more severely in terms of job losses as a result of the pandemic, and we are actually seeing recovery in that area. But some of the other things, and I know many of you will relate when I talk about this, include the fact that women have often worked the double shift, meaning that you're maintaining your household and you're taking care of children, and you're also pursuing your careers and being very busy in the workplace. What the pandemic introduced was beyond the double shift, almost a triple shift, particularly when we had online schooling and we had issues with childcare in the early days. And that has had a significant impact on the psyche and the mental health of women. We have seen that. The data corroborates it. We also know that there is a shadow pandemic. The data also shows, when we talk to police services across the province and indeed across the nation, that the rates of domestic violence have been on the rise and continue to be on the rise. Closely related to that is the echo pandemic, which is related to mental health issues. And so we know that the government has to do some concerted work and effort to make sure that women are supported as we navigate through the remainder of this pandemic and get into the endemic phase. And of course, when we're talking about the impacts of women, we must talk about childcare. Childcare has always been an issue for so long, and all of you mothers out there know that affordable, high quality, accessible childcare is key in terms of how we can manage our days and navigate through our careers. So the government, as I mentioned, is going to be announcing significant supports that are going to be available to women. And as Minister of Transportation, believe me, I will do my part in ensuring that we have more supports available as well. The second thing I'd mentioned I wanted to talk about was the supply chain disruption and the labor shortage. Now, in the early days of the pandemic, when we were sitting around the cabinet table with the various ministers who were responsible for emergency management, we were quite frightened, to be quite honest with you, quite fearful about what the impact of the supply chain disruption would be. What if we couldn't get critical goods across the province, not just food and things like that and medical supplies, but critical drugs and pharmaceuticals? It was a very real concern, and fortunately, we never really had to go down that road of true emergency management in terms of supply chain. But I know that many of you in the transportation sector really suffered greatly in those early days in terms of borders being closed and all kinds of restrictions with the public health measures. And so I do want to acknowledge that that was a very difficult time. And we also know that we are experiencing a significant labor shortage right now, even as we speak. And I know that the estimates indicate almost 4,000 positions that we will be short by 2023 in terms of Class 1 drivers. That's a very serious issue, and I can assure you that it's something that I'm looking at within government. And we do have a number of programs that were announced by my predecessor and something that I announced recently to try to make sure that we address that problem with Class 1 drivers and other aspects of labor shortage in the transportation department, because we're seeing the same situation in the aviation sector. And as we navigate through this problem of labor shortages and supply chain, we know that the government of Alberta has to be sitting with our counterparts at the national table to really think about what is our national strategy. This is a problem that's not going to go away. I know that back in March, I was watching what was happening in the Suez Canal with the Ever Given container shipment that was blocking the Suez Canal for almost 6 days. That resulted in billions of dollars of losses in goods and services, goods being delivered to markets in Asia and the Middle East and other areas. So we've all also been following the news with the lost cargo along the BC coast, and the situation that we see in California is very, very concerning. I bring this up because I know that it's going to have a very, very distinct impact on the transportation sector. But again, we are on it, I am on it, and I will be having lots of conversations with my federal counterpart, Minister Algraba, who luckily I had a good relationship with prior to the writ being dropped, and I'm going to bring up all of these issues with him very soon, once again. Finally, I think the most important part of my keynote today is to talk about leadership within the sector. Many of you who work in this space may not necessarily think of yourselves as leaders, but I do want to tell you that you most definitely are, because even getting spaces and employment in male-dominated workplaces is not the easiest thing. It takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of fortitude, it takes a lot of perseverance and very much of an entrepreneurial spirit. And I've had the opportunity to talk to many female truck drivers in the industry and people who are working in middle management and in administration. And I can tell you, and I do want to say this, that you are more talented, more accomplished, more entrepreneurial, and more persevering than you might think you might be. And what I tend to say to women when I meet in these fields, because they always say, well, you know, I was the first who did this. I'm the first in my family who decided I wanted a Class 1 license. I'm the first person who worked in HR with a male-dominated trucking company. And I always say, well, I've been a first many times as well. One of the first women in the boardroom with intermediate oil and gas companies, not just a woman who's from a racialized community. So I think it's time that we really think of ourselves as pioneers and early adopters in many ways. And it's time to adopt these fancy labels when we talk about the work that we do and the work that needs to be done. So I just want to end off just by telling a quick story about a young woman I met. Her name is Mandeep. I was the Minister of Community and Social Services when I met her. Had no idea I'd be moving to transportation. And that's an entirely different story. I'll have to tell you about that one day. But I did visit a trucking company and they introduced me to Mandeep, and they said, she's the first woman driver that we have, and we are working really hard to get more women interested in getting their Class 1 license. So Mandeep was really excited about taking me out on a drive in her truck, and I was really excited because it was my first drive on a truck as well. And she told me a little bit of her story about how she came from India and she really struggled with the language and finding employment, but luckily she had a very supportive family, and one thing led to another, and there she was. She had her truck and she was driving. And I said to her, I said, Mandeep, so what do you want to do? Like, what's your next step? And she looked at me and she said, you know, and she's very, very shy. She said, I don't know, but I have this dream. I feel like I can have my own company. I feel like I can have a fleet of women drivers and we can all be driving all over Alberta. She said, but you know, it's really far-fetched and I don't think it could ever happen. And I just kind of looked at her because I've heard this story so many times over the years. And I said, well, Mandeep, when you were a young girl growing up in your village in Punjab, did you ever imagine that you would be sitting on an airplane to start a new life in Canada? And when you were taking ESL lessons in the middle of winter in downtown Edmonton, did you ever even consider that you would be part of Alberta's workforce? And when you were a young mom, you know, working in minimum wage paying jobs like many women do, did you ever think that you would be a Class 1 driver in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a global supply crunch, in the middle of a labor crunch, doing your part in delivering 51% of Alberta's GDP in the back of your truck all across the province? That is what you are doing, Mandeep. And you need to build on your successes because what you have done is nothing short of phenomenal. And every woman's journey is unique. That is Mandeep's journey. And all of you who might be listening today who are thinking about how you want to advance in your career, your journeys are also unique, but build on your past successes because look how far you've come. And there's so much opportunity out there. As we come out of the pandemic into endemic, as technology changes, as the economy picks up, and we are seeing that pick up right now, the opportunities are going to present themselves and you need to be ready. And part of being ready is being confident in what you've already done and being confident in what the future holds for you. So that is what I had to say. As Alberta's Minister of Transportation, I decided not to throw a whole lot of numbers and stats at you all today, but I'm sure that will come during the question period. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to join you all today, and I'm looking forward to having this dialogue.